me again, Kim Kelsey. I made a video about a year ago. I said I was going to do some children reading, and then something has been placed on my heart to do my own story. So I wrote a book probably about 13 years ago now, and not doing very well in selling, but people are interested. So I thought I'd do something different. And this is what it's going to be. I'm going to read my book, and I'm going to read one chapter at a time, and I will also discuss what really was going on with me during that chapter. It's a really interesting story. It's about myself growing up here in the city of Detroit back in the 70s. Really traumatic time, especially for us here in the United States, African Americans, and just growing up was really, I would like to say, a rough time. But through all of that, we learned our lessons. Now, look at me, 65, you know, what, 50 something years later, um, sharing my story. So I'm going to read it. You'll get a chance to see the book, the title. The name of the book is In Between My Tears. I chose that because during that year, my teenage years, I did cry a lot. Sort of, I always say I lived in my tears. Went through some really difficult things, and I did cry a lot. So one day that just came to me when I was in the process of writing the book. Those words just came to me in between my tears, and because I've learned that in between all of that crying and sadness, there was some moments that was filled with joy and laughter, and those were times when I was probably determined to become a good, a better person, a better young woman, a good mother, because I was a single mother, a teen mother at the time, a good student, a good, better daughter, a better sister, a better friend. And some of those experiences helped me to become that. So, in between all of those tears, there was a lot of growth, a lot of learning, a lot of laughter as well. So, I'm going to read the first chapter, and then once I finish, I will elaborate a little bit. How many chapters is it, you might be thinking? Well, there's 72 chapters, but they're very, very short. So each week I'll read one, and then I'll elaborate on it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Uh, Kim, Kim, Kirk, Kim Kirk, at yahoo.com. Or you can look me up on In Between My Tears on Facebook as well. So let's begin In Between My Tears, Chapter 1. It was out of my control, like a like a D train who could no longer be held down or restrained, like a voice that could no longer be silenced, or an emotion that could no longer be bottled up. Something inside of me erupted that day. It wasn't just about Melvin, the young boy who had refused to eat his lunch. It wasn't just about Ms. Roberts, insisting that I go back to clean my room after I could have sworn I left it spotless. It wasn't only the fear of ending up back in the seclusion room, although ordinarily my explosion of that room would have kept me from doing what I did next. I snapped at Miss Roberts, grabbed Melvin's arms to haul him from the dining hall to the seclusion room for yelling curse words at her when she insisted he finish eating the cold and unappetizing scraps of food left on his plate. The anger that had been building inside of me for years finally had found an outlet when I saw her treatment of that defenseless child. I picked up a chair and threw it at them as she dragged Melvin out of the dining hall. Before I could make another move, five strong armed staff members came out of nowhere and tackled me. As I hit the floor, words came out of my mouth that I never used before. It was as if my brain had completely spazzed and I could no longer control myself. I kicked and swung at whomever was in the way. I cursed Miss Roberts at at Miss Roberts, and then I cursed people who weren't even there. I screamed at God. If He loves me so much, I thought, why would He let all this happen to me? I yelled at both my parents, who had no clue my heart harbored such hatred towards them. I cursed myself for being born. Every sad, self pity emotion dwelling inside of me from the past 15 years of my life came bursting out like an erupting volcano within less than 15 minutes. 5 people were holding me down, however they could, putting all their adult weight upon me, bending my legs and arms back, grabbing me by my forehead with such force my eyes rolled back, locking me by my ankles. I spurred words of hate at the top of my lungs at them until the words could no longer come. All I had just become sore and hoarse. Seeing I had finally become maimed and broken, the 5 mob-like staff members released me, and then I sobbed. They lifted me up by both my arms to carry me to the school seclusion room. I felt so powerless, I could barely walk of my own will. The closer I reached the room, none of the less, the more my blood began to boil, the more hatred I felt towards everyone, and the more I felt everyone hated me. As easily as someone can transform a dark room by turning on a light switch, seeing the cold gray metal door of seclusion room just around the bend lit me up. Staff members began dragging me at lightning speed to get me behind the door of that room. I started all over again. Before they can even take out their keys to unlock it, I began kicking furiously, wildly at the door, yelling and screaming until I didn't want to, and I couldn't even hear myself anymore. Staff watched me scream and holler, spit and sob, kick and twist until the very last ounce of energy in the tantrum I was having was depleted. I had become powerless again. I felt myself being dragged into the seclusion room. I watched sadly as the door slammed shut on me, and I was once again in the dark, alone. Every so often, I would see someone else's eyes peep through the small square window at the top of the door to monitor me. The room was empty, with nothing but 4 dingy, paint-chipped walls surrounding me. The floor and the cement bench was cold, and despite the sun shining from the hospital grounds through the long window, there was no heat from its rays. I wanted to hide, but there was nowhere I could go and nowhere for me to run. Despite my mental and physical exhaustion from fighting with staff, I wanted to hit something with my might, but the only things surrounding me were the walls and cement blocks. I walked over to the window, placed my hands over the steel grate that covered its pane, and stood there looking out, crying and hating myself. I thought back to how I had gotten to this point. At 15 years of age, I had already lived through more than most do in an entire lifetime, and now, secluded and angry, there was nothing I could do but think about the events that had led up to this day. That's chapter 1. Now take a deep breath on that. What was that all about? Well, I have to start at the beginning, but I'm going to go back as I continue to read this. I was in a mental institution at that time. It was called Detroit Psychiatric Institute, and it was in Detroit on the